is a dependency injection using an XML configuration based approach. Okay, so this was actually the one which is originated from when the Spring has started, Spring framework. This is the original form of configuration dependency injection. Okay, it started in way back, like 2004. Okay, it is still supported fully. All the things what you can do it in Java configuration, you can still do it in the XML file. And I think in the beginning, someone was asking about a question. Most of the places when you go and Google anything, you will get only a XML based configuration details and solutions in the Google or blogs or any books you see. Okay, that's most commonly seen in existing application because the XML configuration was heavily used because this is the original one. So first one was developed as an XML, then they introduced an annotations, and then they came with a Java configuration. Okay, we'll go and understand how this XML works. Okay, again at the end we can go and look at what are the advantages and disadvantage, and you have a freedom to choose whichever one which you would like to use it. But if you look at compare from the Java configuration perspective, all the configuration instructions goes into Java configuration, and in this case all the configuration will goes into XML file. That's the only difference. Okay, there you will be writing a Java configuration class, here you will be writing in an XML. Other than that, there is no difference. Okay, so let's look at this comparison. So I use this configuration class and I define this profile, and here I have the Java class name, which is an app config, and I have the bean and I have a method name which is a bean ID, and I do a constructor dependency injection, setter dependency injection, and return the object. And I can go and define the explicitly bean ID using the name attribute inside the bean annotation. So this is what we have already learned, and equivalent to this in an XML. Okay, I have a beans tag. Okay, like which is like inside this app configuration, I have a multiple beans defined. Similarly here at the beans tag, I can go and define a multiple beans here. So beans, and I can go and define a multiple bean. Okay, so I go and say this is my bean, and I put an ID. Okay, ID equal to a string, unique string. Okay, here ID will be by default it will be method name, or you can go and explicitly define the bean ID like this. Okay, so that ID you can actually give it in the ID attribute equal to this is my ID. Okay, since I have in the Java configuration Java class, when you say like transfer service implementation, automatically there will be an import for this class. So there will be an import list of imports for each and every class. So since XML doesn't know where this classes belongs, you need to provide the fully qualified name and the class, package name and class. Okay, so so class name, this class should be a concrete class always. Okay, the class, and I do a dependency injection here. Like for doing a setter dependency injection, I want to call the repository to inject it. So what I do is for creating a repository bean, I define the same thing. Again, a bean ID is this account repository. Inside that I say this is a class JDBC account repository. Okay, and if I want to do any dependency injection, I will do it inside. So now I want to inject this repository class here like into using a setter method. What I do is I take this bean ID. Okay, I want to inject this account repository bean ID object into transfer service implementation through setter dependency injection. So for that I go and write this additional code and refer to the bean ID, so which is already exist in my XML configuration. So this is my account repository ID, bean ID. I'll go and put a ref to another bean ID. That means that object which is already there in the container, using this account repository bean ID, go and do a ref, and that object gets injected to the setter method. Okay, here setter method name, if you look at, I have only a repository as a name, but inside it is going to prefix as a set repository method. Okay, it uses a Java bean convention where you have a getter and setter methods. You don't need to go and specify here. So Spring uses Java bean convention. The repository here, it means set repository a method it is going to refer, and for this method it is going to inject a reference to an account repository object. Okay, so these are a few configuration where I'll do it in an XML. So in case of profile, I'll go and add, if I want to define this as a part of a profile equal to production. This is a keyword. In the beans itself, I'll go and say all these beans will become part of this profile and equal to this profile name. That's one thing. So if I wanted to do a constructor dependency injection, I do this constructor dash org and a reference to another bean ID. And this bean ID should already defined in the XML file. Okay. So using constructor org, I'll do a dependency injection. If I have multiple parameters to be passed to a constructor, what I do is I will have a multiple entries. The constructor org reference to account repository. Another one is customer repository. Okay. So most of the time, like the class type will be imagined getting injected. And if you want to specifically explicitly say that this is an object, it needs to be injected to the first parameter, second parameter, there is a way you can go and customize it. There is an index. You can say index 0, 1, 2, 3, and accordingly that object gets injected to the right place. Okay, so we have multi constructor dependency with a single parameter and multiple parameters. Okay. So what happens behind the scene is, like when I say the first I'll go and create a repository object and created the Spring Bean, and this bean gets injected to the service implementation. So behind the scene what happens, like if you look at the Java configuration classes, it doesn't mean that it goes and converts to the Java configuration. No, just to see that what happens behind the scene. First thing, it will go and create this bean and get injected to a service implementation. Okay, so now I have another way of doing a dependency injection using a setter. Here, like service implementation, it uses a default constructor to create this object, and then it calls the set repository method to inject the repository object. So repository is a reference. When I say ref, it is going to get the reference to an object which is already created in the container. So repository, it will get this object, gets injected to this service simple using the set repository method. Okay, and the equivalent is like I have a service method and repository method. First, it will go and create an object with a default constructor, and using a set repository, it will go and call this method to inject it. But if you look at a constructor dependency injection, setter dependency injection, at the end effect is same. Okay, at the end of constructor dependency, you have already object which is created. So it's a constructor dependency injection. In the setter also, all the dependency get injected after the object is created. If the end effect is same, then why do I need to have two different options, constructor and setter? Why do I need two different options to do a dependency injection?
Hello,
Yes.
Manju.
Yep.
Actually, yeah, there could be one of the scenarios that, for example, the particular dependent object is not ready at the time of initialization, or when we are, so at the time of construction, we can't have constructor injection. That's why we have setter injection also, so that later down the line, if I have my dependent object ready, then I can set it to the object which actually requires it.
So
this could be one of the possible scenarios.
Okay. Any other reason?
Another apart from
this, the testability.
Go ahead.
No, I was thinking, I mean, from a testability perspective.
So what is different?
Constructor and setter, is it?
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else?
I mean, I can have a behavior where I don't have a setter at all, right? I just have an instance variable, and
Right. But why
so
do
in
I
that
need these
case,
two options? What use cases can we think about? Okay, so let's say,
Dually explain.
I have an object and there are some dependencies are going to be mandatory and there are some dependencies are optional, let's say. Okay. When it is optional, I don't have to be injected anymore. I don't have to, it is an option. If it is there, I will inject it. If it is not there, it is okay. Okay, but there are some cases, if I wanted that object to be usable, there are some mandatory dependency injection you must need to inject it. In those cases, what I do is I prefer to go with the constructor, because when I do a constructor dependency injection, object will not be get created unless you have that dependency has been injected at the time of object creation itself. So that will make sure all the mandatory object dependency injection will be done at the creation time. Okay. And in case some optional things are there, like for example here, a repository, and I'm okay if I don't have this repository and injected, I can still live with it because I may have a default implementation inside. If somebody can override, they can override. In many cases, I will have this default preferences. Right? If somebody wanted to change the preference and inject that, it's okay. Okay, but I don't want to be stopped by it. So in those scenarios, actually I'll go and prefer to use a setter dependency injection. Okay, so constructors are mandatory and setters are optional. That's one difference. Another thing is, if you look at it in case of constructor, there will be like in some many projects you would have followed a very some rules as a final instance variable, let's say. Okay, when you prefix with final for an instance variable, and you cannot initialize or reinitialize those instance variables other than a constructor. It's a Java behavior. Okay, so those kind of kind of best practice, when some project follows, not to change the instance variable which is assigned during the constructor. So if I want to do that, those attributes need to be initialized part of the constructor itself. Okay, so for those reasons, I will go and use the constructor dependency injection. There's things like that. It has an advantages to use it. So Spring supports both the dependency injection, which is a constructor, and setter dependency injection using an XML, and you can do a mix and match of both of them. Okay, so in case of like constructor arg and constructor property, both you can use it. This is for the constructor dependency injection, constructor arg with a reference to another bean ID, and this is for a setter. I use this property with a name, select the set optional is there, and this optional bean gets injected. Okay, you can do a mix and match both of things. It is just to create how it is getting created. So service simple with a constructor dependency injection plus set optional. You have an optional object method will be get called and injected the optional implementation. Okay, so whatever we discussed so far, it is a reference to another object when you're injecting either through constructor or setter. But if I want to inject the actual kind of configuration value, the way I can do is using a value. Okay, instead of ref, I can just go and add this value equal to whatever you are given in the string that will be get injected to the method. If it is in an XML, you cannot, you don't know how to distinguish the data type. Whether I want to convert this as a string or an integer or long, I don't know. I cannot do that. So what Spring does is, based on the signature of the method, this value will be converted appropriately to that object and injected. Okay, the Spring will take care of that for you when there is a conversion need to be done. So this is the equivalent code that it is done. And so in this case, let's say a value I'm giving as a 29, and this is an integer. So this within quotes, whatever you are given, this value need to be converted to an integer and injected. And this conversion will be automatically taken care by Spring. So Spring can convert all the numeric types, big decimal, and Boolean, true or false, date, locally, and resources. So there are many other things it can convert automatically by Spring. Okay, that is a very simple equivalent thing. You go and add it and inject the values using a set int property. Okay, so that's about creating using an XML file. So now if I want to create, I created this XML file and I want to go and create an application context. So the way I can create an application context using another implementation of the application context is the class path XML application context. So I go and use this class path XML application context where I provide an application configuration XML file where inside I have all the bean definition. Okay, so what this class path XML application context does is behind the scene it uses this prefix. It will go and search this package plus folder plus this XML file in a class path. It will go and search the class path and it takes the XML file from the class path and upload this class XML file and start scanning one by one bean definition and create an object based on the order in which it has to create it based on the dependency injection type. Okay, so this is one implementation. Okay, and this XML file always be picked up from a class path because you are using a class path XML application context. For some reason, if you wanted to get this application context from application configuration XML file from the file system, so in that case you can use this file system XML application context. Okay, where you can provide either fully qualified path, which is an absolute path, or a relative path. It's a relative. When you give this relative path, it has to be relative to the folder where you are launching the JVM application from. It has to be relative to that. Let's say if you are launching an application from like Tomcat bin in the bin folder, and this application configuration file XML file should be there in the bin folder when you say /. Okay, that's a relative path. So you can choose which one want to use it accordingly. You can. Okay, there are two things. Okay, one is a class path, another one is a file system, and there's one more which is like XML web application context. Okay, if you're keeping an application context in the web root folder, which is like web.inf folder, it's going to pick up from there in case of if you want to do it from the XML web application. Okay, one thing. Let's say for some reason I have one application context, a few application context in a class path, and one or two application context which is coming from file system. So in that case, I want to use one implementation, which is like class path XML application context. In this case, I use these two XML files which are coming from class path, but this file I want to load it from the file system. The way I prefix is I use this file, the file colon. I prefix either I can put the relative path or an absolute path. Okay, so there are the same like class path, file, and HTTP prefixes are available based on which implementation you use. So in this case, class path XML application context, the default uh, uh, path will be class path. So for the class path XML files, you don't need to prefix it. So other than the class path, you need to prefix for other things to load it from. Similarly, if you are using like, for example, like file system XML application context, you don't need to prefix here file colon. Okay, and if you want to refer to class path application context, if it is there, then you need to prefix this class path colon, then the wherever that application context is available. So the default will be based on whatever the implementation you are using, that will become a default. Other things you need to explicitly prefix it and call it. Okay, so that's about calling. Okay, so now I want to control the behaviors of the beans. Remember we discussed about the post construct. Okay, if I want to add that behavior in XML configuration, I use this init method. So init method equal to setup. So there is a setup method, which visibility is again like no parameter, return void, and public. Okay, so init method is option is available in an XML to do this post construct similar to that. So you don't need to go and add this annotation. Instead of that, you can do it in a XML itself. Okay. Same thing for pre-destroy, where the destroy method is an attribute where you can say this is a method, and this method again no parameters, returns void. Okay. And if I want to specify the scope, by default the scope is again like singleton. Okay. If I want to override the singleton behaviors, I can go and add this scope attribute. Scope equal to either I can go and add the prototype or other scopes which are available, like singleton, prototype, request, and session are custom. So all the scope which are there in the Java configuration, it is available here. So using this scope attribute, I can go and add it. In case of Java configuration, I will go and add this like scope annotation. Here I use this scope attribute. Okay, and for a lazy initialization, I'll make this a lazy true, but this object will get created only when you ask for it. Okay. Here, if I want to configure in an XML, I say lazy equal to true. Okay. By default, it will be false. We don't specify this. This is like really not recommended to use because it may be misused oftenly because your intention is to reduce the startup time. If that is the case, you should not use this. Only in an occasion where, like for example, I have a bean, I will be using that in only one corner case of my application usage. Let's say I'm trying to connect to a mainframe IBM system, and that will be used only when there is a corner case. So you can go and configure such kind of use cases as a bean as a lazy init. So you need to really justify for using. Otherwise, what happens if you go and specify this lazy init equal to true, and all the beans are created at the runtime, those beans, and if there is any issues with this bean definition, okay, and the bean will not get created and it may choke in between. Okay, it's always create all the beans upfront when you want to use it. So unless you have a strong justification not to create bean at the startup time, based on that you can go and say that. Okay. And similarly, we did the import of multiple configuration files in the main configuration file. So XML also supports that, and import and add the XML files to combine and make it as a master XML file. It also does like use a relative path by default, and if you can also use this file prefixes, different prefixes like file, class path, HTTP, you can use to get the import from different thing. So in case of this configuration, if you say db-config.xml file, since it doesn't specify anything, and in this XML file, so this XML file, let's say application config.xml file, and it expects that db-config.xml file to be there in the same folder. That's a relative path. And if you want to get it from different path, you need to go and specify class path : folder name / that particular XML file. Okay, so that's one thing. And in an XML world, there is a terminology if you want to refer to the same bean ID or same tags or same element. It is being distinguished by using namespaces. So namespaces usually to avoid the name collisions. That's the reason they have introduced. But slightly it will be used for the different usage in the case of the Spring configurations. Okay. By default, so you don't need to worry about this complete configuration. Let's understand this what it is. Now I have this XML namespace. So what it means is, by default, if you go and add this namespace, and you have to add the specific schema location for the specific bean namespace, specific namespace which you added here. Okay. Now there is a schema location. In the schema location, I will provide two informations. One is this is like a folder name. Okay. Under this folder, I have a existing, which is a schema. Okay. So the way it is followed is, you will have to go and give this folder URL. Under that, you have the schema file. Okay. So this is being followed with the URL format, which is like HTTP : blah, blah, like this. And you have to, you don't need to remember this, but this is a pattern. So for each and every schema which you wanted to add to an XML file, so there are two ways you can add it. Either you can go and refer an XML file and copy and paste, or the STS tool will have an option to enable or add different schemas and namespace to your XML configuration file. So there's dozens of namespaces are available. Okay, so you can go and add them based on your need. So the namespaces are basically created to something like simplify or reduce configurations of XML. Okay, if you look at in the case of when I want to define an embedded data source, okay, I have to go and write all the beans which is defined by the Spring itself. Okay, I need to configure those things, but I don't know whether it's a constructor dependency injection or setter dependency injection. So all those things I need to figure out. Okay, so any Spring specific beans, if I wanted to include in my XML configuration file, I need to go and refer to look at the class, which package it is, whether it is a constructor dependency injection or setter dependency injection. So all those things I need to actually go and figure out myself. First of all, I have a problem in doing all those things for my application itself. If I have to go and do it for Spring beans as well, then I might do a wrong way of configuring it. So what Spring has done is, okay, so you don't need to really remember any of those classes or packages, or whether it's a constructor dependency injection or setter dependency injection. So you don't need to worry about it. What they have done is they have given a kind of tags, okay, and those tags has been put it into a separate subsets of the functionality based on what it gives from the Spring framework. Okay, for example, by default EOP will be disabled. Okay, if I want to go and enable the EOP, there is a namespace called EOP. I need to go and add the namespace, and when I add it, associated schema also I need to add it. Okay, and that schema will give you kind of new tags. Okay, if you just go and use those tags, behind the scene it will go and configure all the required beans to make the EOP work. Okay, So I don't need to go and define those beans manually in my XML configuration file. Instead of it, if I just go and specify that tag, okay, EOP colon enable auto proxy enable. So I want to enable the Spring EOP. Similarly, if I want to go and enable the transaction, so transaction colon something tag, and if I want to use a Spring security, so there are a bunch of namespaces and schema is being provided by Spring. I just need to go and add them and use the tags to simplify my XML configuration. So these namespaces and tags actually greatly reduced as simplifying my bean definition, and also hide the actual bean definition behind the scenes. So I don't need to know about all the Spring specific classes, packages, all dependency injections. I don't need to worry about it. Okay, that's the whole purpose of having this namespace in the Spring. Okay, the way it works is, let's say I want to load the one of the property file. The way I load the property file is I use this one of the Spring implementation, which is the property source placeholder configurer. So I need to give this inject this db config property file to there's a set location method, which is like setter method. So if I want to load this db configuration file, I will have to remember what is the package, a property source placeholder configurer. This is the class. And I also need to know whether it's a setter dependency injection or constructor dependency injection. So I need to configure if I want to load the property files. To simplify and make it very elegant, so and I don't need to know all those details, then what Spring has done is there is a context is a namespace. So there's a the context is a namespace. I just need to go and add this namespace, and inside that it will use several tags. One of the tag is property dash placeholder. If I use this property placeholder, behind the scene Spring will go and set up this property sources placeholder configure class, the bean, and whatever I provide this like location, I just need to use this as an attribute to pass my db configuration property file where it is located, and inside it will figure out whether I need to do a setter dependency injection or constructor dependency injection. It will automatically Spring will figure out. I don't need to worry about it. What I need to worry about it, I just need to add this namespace and start using those tags with an attributes to be passed. So it will become very simple, and the same functionality can be achieved in a simple way without even having much hassle, and also without even typing many things. This is a kind of shortcut. So namespace provides a lot of shortcuts and hides a Spring specific bean creation and bean configuration definition, and it makes it simple to use it. Okay. The way it is being used is like this. There is a dbconfig.property file. When you load it using this property placeholder, okay, so inside this property file I have this db url, which is a url, and there is a username and password, things like that. So you start using this as a key to replace. I think we discussed in the on this, like there is a dollar sign within flavor braces. If I go and specify the key at the runtime, before even the object gets created, I need to go and replace the actual url and actual username. Okay, so that is being done using this property placeholder. It loads this configuration file and do the whenever you have the dollar sign with the flower braces, it will go and search in the dbconfig property file and get the actual value and replace it, and then the object gets created. And after, when you look at this and this together, when during the runtime, before even object gets created, you will have actual value get be replaced with a key. Okay, so that is being done by using this property placeholder. It has been taken care of. This is one example. So we'll discuss about this later, how it does. Okay, that's one thing. This is the power of namespace. If you look at with this context property placeholder, it will just hides one bean definition behind the scene. Similarly, like if I want to enable the EOP, EOP colon aspect J auto proxy, if I just use this, the behind the scene, like to enable the EOP, it hides almost like 5+ bean definition behind the scene. And for the transaction to make the things work, like TX namespace annotation driven, this specific tags will actually go and set up almost more than 15 bean definition behind the scene. Okay, so tags will make our life very easy, simplifies the configuration to enable the specific need of the functionality. So like this, we will start using this EOP transaction namespace, things like that later in the sessions. Okay, so that's about namespace. The way I can add the different namespace, if you go to STS tool, XML file, there's a namespace tab for this, and if you go and click on this tab, you will see all the bunch of namespace which is available in the system. And if you just go and add this based on what you want, you can go and enable it, and correspondingly that schema location and everything will get updated automatically by the STS tool itself. So you don't need to go and add this all the schema location and namespace manually yourself. So moment you start adding those things manually, it will get error prone, okay, when you compile it, when you run it. So always try to use a wizard, this STS wizard, to do this configuration. And also, like, we have different versions of Spring, and each and every versions will give you a different additions of new addition or modification to the schema file. Okay, so each and every version will come up with its own version of schema with suffixing with this, like 3031, 4041, things like that. So now when I move Spring version from like 2.5 to 3, 3 to 3.2, things like that, wherever I have added this version, I need to keep changing that version to avoid the new functionalities which is added in the latest functionality. So that means I need to always do a migration. When I'm migrating, I need to make sure that this is also pointing to the latest one. So in my XML file, should I need to configure pointing to the 3.1, or should I use without version? Okay. Now it has been in the latest Spring. Okay. You don't need to worry about the version. If you point to this without version, automatically Spring will point to the latest version which is available in the system. So that has been taken care. So you don't need to worry about it of updating an XML file every time when you change the Spring framework. Okay, so the best common practice is do not use a version number. If you start using a version number, you will have to manually go and change the based on the Spring version which you use, you need to go and change. So if you use the without version, it becomes easier for the migration. So this is okay. So we use this, remember we talked about the component scan annotation, and the same component scan, if I want to do it from an XML file, in the context colon, there is a component scan tag, you can use it and you can specify the base package.